focus. And I thought maybe since we mentioned there'd be 5 minutes per person, questions kind of help me to say what I think would be helpful for our study. Then others will be able to hop in. However, there's not a lot of people here, so I might be able to come back and share a little bit more, but I will try to hold to the 5 minutes. I'll try to. If I go over just a little bit so I can get a complete thought, have mercy on me. But there's 3 questions I want to talk about. Number one, I want to talk about the dragon, what I've observed about that, what we can see from the pioneers, and you guys can open up on that. The second thing I want to look at is I want to share just a couple of thoughts I have on the unclean spirits. I think that was very important, like something that came out with that. I want to talk about that in connection with the quote that David gave about the threefold union that I observed. And so that's what we're going to kind of look at. And is there a way for me to like pull this? I put together a couple of just a few little slides. Is there a way to pull it up on here so you can see it?
You can go to share screen. Do you see the button share screen, Anthony?
Okay, is it just where you see share?
Yeah, share screen.
I can see share. I don't see share screen.
Oh, okay. Can you help me here, please?
All it says the host disables participant screen sharing. So
sorry, hold on.
You have to help me out there.
I need my husband's help here.
Good morning. Let's see.
I like your shirt, Dominique.
I was gonna wear it, but then I realized that I've been wearing it the last 3 weeks, and I thought that you guys might think that that I haven't showered in 3 weeks. So I decided to change.
Don't worry, I have a Sunday uniform, so you'll probably notice I wear the same stuff every Sunday.
I honestly haven't noticed anything. If you guys are wearing the same thing or haven't taken a shower, I just noticed that shirt for the first time. I thought it was nice.
Me neither. I haven't noticed that either, Stephanie.
Okay.
Hey, Anthony, try now. You should be able
Most guys don't notice things anyway, unless you tell them.
Okay, I see. Ooh, let's see here. All right. So, can you guys still hear me? Can you guys hear me at all?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. All right, so as you can see on the slide, I just want to begin with this is just some of my thoughts, and this is some observations that I made about the dragon. So I kind of want to start there. And there's many other observations you can make. We'll look at some later. But the question was, who is the dragon in Revelation chapter 16? And so as you can see here on the screen, these are 3 of the main observations that I came up with. Revelation chapter 12, you have in verse 9. Actually, I think I may have put the wrong verse on there. I don't know. Let me go back. Anyway, we see evidence that the dragon existed before the existence of any earthly nation. And so when you look at the story of Revelation chapter 9, I'm going to assume that most of us are acquainted with Revelation chapter 9. You see there's war in heaven, and Michael and his angels fought, and the dragon and his angels fought. And obviously this happened long before there was ever a nation on earth. So when we talk about the dragon on a larger scale, we know that this dragon existed before there was ever a nation. So generally we talk about in Bible prophecy, there's a beast, beasts representing nations, but however this dragon exists in heaven, he's kicked out of heaven. The second thought that I noticed is that the dragon, according to Revelation chapter 20, verse 2, and Dave and I were sort of talking about this last week, the dragon existed during the 1,000 years while other nations are destroyed. So when you go to Revelation chapter 20 and verse 2, you'll find that the Bible talks about, in fact, in Revelation chapter 20 and verse 2, the dragon is said to be Satan himself. The Bible actually says, and he laid hold of the dragon, that old serpent which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years. So again, you see that the dragon exists after the nations are destroyed. And then, of course, in Revelation chapter 12 and verse 9, again, the Bible plainly states, as it did in Revelation chapter 20, verse 2, that the dragon is Satan. But there's some other parts of this. So one of the questions I came up with was, why would Adventist pioneers point to the dragon of Revelation 12 as pagan Rome? So there's a reason for that. Of course, this is one of the thoughts you have to think about. Here's another question. It says, why the 7 heads? Why were there, I wrote this in the wrong way. I just kind of typed this up this morning. But basically, why would the dragon, why would Satan, we understand the dragon is represented as Satan, why would Satan have 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 crowns on his head? So obviously, when I looked at that, the Bible is trying to identify something else about this dragon. Like there's some other symbols that are here. It's not just that this represents Satan, but there's some other symbols. Now, this is what Uriah Smith has to say in, this is Daniel Revelation 1897. He's actually, when I was reading Uriah Smith, he was actually one that gave me this thought. Although there's a little bit about this that I can't say I quite agree with yet, but I do agree with the fact that he's, when Uriah Smith talks about this dragon has to symbolize something else. The Bible is trying to give us another illustration of some sort of kingdom, some sort of power. I really agree with that part of what Uriah Smith is saying. And so this is what he says. He says, another symbol is here introduced. He's referring to Revelation chapter 12 and verse 3. Yes, verse 3. Well, this is verse 3 and then compared to verse 9, actually. He says, another symbol is here introduced, and John hastens to tell us what this symbol represents. It is the devil and Satan, Revelation 12, verse 9. And he says here, but this is not the same as the dragon of verses 3 and 4. Now, this is the part where I'm really, you'll notice in 1909 version that this idea is sort of modified a little bit. What Uriah Smith is saying here is that the dragon of Revelation 12:3 is different from the dragon Revelation 12:9. But there's really no indication biblically that they're different. The Bible's just sort of, at least what I observe, is that the Bible just sort of assumed that every time you use the term dragon, it's talking about the same power. So I don't know if I would agree with Uriah Smith in the 1897 version, say that they're different. But what I do agree with him on is that obviously the Bible is trying to give us a deeper symbol. And so I do believe that what he concludes about the dragon being used in Daniel chapter 12 and verse 3, I do agree with Uriah Smith that it is a symbol in a sense of Rome, but it's also a symbol of Satan. And I'll try to explain that if we don't really get that right away, I'll try to explain that a little bit, how we harmonize that idea. So Uriah Smith continues and says, he explains that the dragon was a red dragon in Revelation 12 and verse 3, has 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his head. And then he said it would be most grotesque to try to apply this to Satan personally. He says, Satan is not said anywhere in the Bible to be red. He is not blessed with the number of heads and horns there stated. And while he might, as the God of this world, have 1 crown, how would he manage to wear 7? But all these features are very appropriate as applied to pagan Rome. So he looks at these 7 heads and 10 horns, and he says, look, that's pagan Rome. Obviously God is trying to give us a symbol of something. And in fact, when it very much, well, I won't go into the details about that unless we want to talk about that later. But he's saying this is pagan Rome. And I agree with him that I believe because of the fact the Bible is trying to give these extra symbols of the heads and so forth, that it does represent pagan Rome. However, I'm gonna show why I believe it also illustrates Satan himself. Okay. This is the 1909 version. You can find this on page 549. If you notice, I just put there because I know a lot of people really argue this point. Uriah Smith did die in 1903, so this version was revised after Uriah Smith's death. But you can write that down if you like. So here's some other thoughts about the dragon. So if the dragon is Satan, we know that the description that he's given in verse 3 of Revelation 12, he has 7 heads and 10 horns. Well, we know this is very symbolic. This is not how Satan literally looks. If anyone has a question on that, here's some text to kind of illustrate that. Before the fall, Lucifer was not illustrated as dragon looking. We can see that Ezekiel chapter 28 and Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 13 through 17. He's actually described as a covering cherub. And then also, even after the fall, Lucifer is not described as a dragon. In Ezekiel chapter 14, verse 6, if you remember, there's the story of Lucifer and his fall. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer? That's verse 12. In verse 16, it talks about the completion of that fall. And what's interesting, in verse 16, the Bible talks about how the world looks upon Lucifer and they said, is this the man? And talks about how he destroyed kingdoms and all these sorts of things. I thought it was very interesting that the world will look up on Lucifer one day and they don't describe a dragon, they describe a man. Is this the man that subdued kingdoms, so forth? So before the fall and after the fall, there's no indication that Satan looks like a dragon, no indication that he looks like he has 7 heads, none of that. And so obviously the Bible is trying to symbolize something that was happening at that time. And this is why I believe, yes, the dragon represents Satan, but the fact he has 7 heads and 10 horns, God is trying to illustrate some other power that I believe Satan will use to persecute his people and specifically to attack and crucify his son. So do we have illustrations of that elsewhere in the Bible? So here's some verses that you probably find to be interesting. Isaiah chapter 14, again, verse 4 talks about how God tells Isaiah to take up a proverb against Babylon. And it's in that same chapter, as he's taking up this proverb against the kingdom of Babylon, the king of Babylon, he then says in verse 12, how art thou fallen, O Lucifer? Notice there that God likens, he connects Satan with the powers that he was using on earth, like these earthly powers. So Lucifer and Babylon, it's like they receive, as God prophesied on Babylon, he went ahead and prophesied on Lucifer. It's biblically, you can see this evidence that God connects Lucifer with these earthly kingdoms. Hopefully that makes sense. You can ask me questions about that afterwards. Another passage you'll find is Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 12 and 13. This is the king of Tyre. And God prophesies on the king of Tyre, but you notice there's evidence that he's also prophesying again about Lucifer. So again, you see how God is speaking to these nations as though he's speaking to Satan. They're so connected. So it's not unusual that we could see in the book of Revelation chapter 12 that as God is prophesying about what Rome would do, he's also connecting it with Satan. We see Daniel chapter 12, verse 13. I have a question mark on that one. I have to go back and look it up. But you find there the prince of Persia holding up Michael. And I remember from my recollection, that prince of Persia is represented as Satan, Lucifer holding back Gabriel. And then Michael comes to help. And then you have them working with the kings of Persia. That would be Cyrus and those other kings. So it's not unusual. I want to, so those are some of my thoughts on the dragon. I'm going to come back to the dragon a little bit, but here's some of my thoughts on the threefold union. So here's the quote I believe that David was bringing up last week. It says, through the 2 great errors, the immortality of the soul and Sunday sacredness, Satan will bring the people under his deceptions. While the former lays the foundation of spiritualism, the latter creates a bond of sympathy with Rome. The Protestants of the United States will be foremost in stretching their hands across the gulf to grasp the hands of spiritualism. They will reach over the abyss to clasp hands with the Roman power. And under the influence of this threefold union, this country will follow in the steps of Rome of trampling on the rights of conscience. So that's one of the quotes we see that talks about the threefold union. But there's another one that I thought was very unique, because you can kind of see some timing as to when the threefold union will be formed. And then you see introduced a fourth power. And so this was actually in, you can find this also in Last Day Events, page 131. Of course, it talks about when Protestants shall stretch her hand across the gulf to grasp the hands of the Roman power, when she shall reach over the abyss to clasp the hands with spiritualism, when under the influence of this threefold union, our country shall repudiate every principle of its constitution as a Protestant Republican government, and shall make provision for the propagation of papal falsehoods and delusions. And then she says, then we may know that the time has come for the marvelous working of Satan, and that the end is near. This is very interesting to me, because we have to understand that the time of the marvelous working of Satan comes right on the heels of the threefold union being formed. You'll see why this is very interesting to me, because the threefold union is formed. Right after that, you see the marvelous working of Satan. Now I'm going to show you something that I thought was very unique. We'll look at some other quotes and I'll be done here. This was one. The reason why I thought this was unique, actually, let me turn your attention to the scripture for just a moment. I'll just refer to it there. So last week we talked about Revelation chapter 16 and verse 13 and 14. And what we mentioned in Revelation 16, 13, 14 is that we see there a threefold union. We see the dragon, we see the beast, we see the false prophet, but also we see that out of their mouths come unclean spirits like frogs. I would like to say that those unclean spirits like frogs are a representation of spiritualism. We could go through some other studies on that if you want evidence of that. But one of the clearest evidence is what the Bible says itself. The Bible actually says in verse 14, speaking about the unclean spirits like frogs, it says, for they are the spirits of devils, working miracles, which go forth unto the kings of the earth and of the whole world, to gather them to the battle of the great day of God. So this is very unique, because the Bible likens these unclean spirits. It says they are the spirits of devils. And then the Bible gives a purpose. It says their job is to go forth and to gather the kings of the earth and the whole world, and their goal is to battle against God Almighty. Now, the unique thing about this passage is that this union in Revelation 16, and you could write this down, mark it down, it happens after the close of probation. That's very important. It happens after the close of probation. There's another passage in Revelation, in the book of Revelation, that talks about unclean spirits or devils. It's in Revelation chapter 18. Now you have to understand that Revelation is not in chronological order. It's more, you have to watch the turn of events, but it's not in chronological order. So in Revelation 18, you can find this in verse 1 and verse 2. What you find in verse 1 is there's a loud cry. The third angel's message is given again with the power of the fourth angel. And then you find in verse 2, it says, and he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and cage of every unclean and hateful bird. Notice here that the spirits again, these devils again, are being described. They're not being described as unclean frogs this time. They're being described as unclean and hateful birds. So symbolically, in Bible prophecy, we can almost get the idea, this is sort of a side note, but we can almost get the idea that when you see these unclean animals, almost like the ones you see in Leviticus, it's almost a reference to evil spirits, devils, spirits, but you have this two forms. Now, reason why I'm bringing this out is because Revelation 18, this happens while they're preaching this message. The gospel is still being preached. So obviously there's still opportunity for some to give their hearts to God. And the Bible says that there are these unclean spirits. You do see, and of course, if you refer to Revelation chapter 17, you see a threefold union being formed in Revelation 17 and Revelation 18. This happens before the close of probation. This threefold union we see happening and forming before the close of probation. Revelation chapter 16 is formed. We see that threefold union with the power of Satan coming on the scene. We see that happening after the close of probation. By the way, I just need to ask, because I can't see your faces. Does that make sense so far, yes or no? Does anyone have any questions?
I definitely see. Thank you, Anthony, for having it on the screen. It definitely makes it helpful. And I think it's clear. I do see what you're talking about in respect to the timings, how obviously Revelation 18 is not necessarily talking after the close of probation, but before, because in verse 4, you have him saying, "Come out of her, my people," coming out of
Exactly.
Babylon. And so, yeah, I view the timing of it accurate. The only question I have is when you're talking about the threefold union in Revelation 18, I do see how you're talking about every foul spirit, every cage of unclean bird, and how Babylon has become the habitation of devils. I guess the threefold union here, I guess, is not spelled out as clear as obviously in Revelation 16, but you definitely do still see, and I think that's what you're alluding to, is the unclean spirits or the frog-like spirits that come out in Revelation 16 still relevant and still working in Revelation 18.
Yes, yes. And you'll really see it in Revelation 17. So in Revelation 17, you find the fornication. The fornication with the woman that rides the beast. So that's Catholicism. You find in Revelation 17, verse 13, you find the 10 horns that give their power to the beast. So you see this union already. And the Bible actually tells us, Ellen White actually says those 10 horns represent Protestantism. So you see this union already. But then it continues in Revelation 18, and then Revelation 18 is where we see introduced the unclean spirits, like the birds. So there's the third portion of the union. And under these three powers, you'll see then they make war with the Lamb. You'll see then they between the three of those powers, they draw all the world under their government, system of government. They deceive the whole world. So that's what you find between. So you kind of have to do Revelation 17 and 18 together, but you see them introduced in that order: the papacy, Protestantism, and then of course you have spiritualism, chapter 18, verse 2. But one of the reasons I was bringing out is because, or wanted to make that statement, and I'm free to any questions that we have. One of the things I want to talk about with in relation to the quote where Ellen White says, the threefold union is formed, and then she says, then we can know that the end is near, and basically that the time for the marvelous working of Satan, is they're preparing for that, and that the end is near. The reason why I want to show that is because Revelation 18, we do see the threefold union, but we don't see the marvelous working of Satan yet. In Revelation 16, we see the beast, of course, we see the false prophet, we see spiritualism, and what we see added in Revelation 16 is the dragon power, which the Bible tells that the dragon is a representation of Satan. Now, what I was thinking, my conclusion was, could it be Revelation 16, because the question was, who is the dragon? Could this be a representation of the marvelous working of Satan that would come upon the scene? So then I went to Great Controversy, and I found this quote in Great Controversy 624. It is actually 2 paragraphs, and I'll close my time right here. So Ellen White says this. She says, fearful sights of a supernatural character will soon be revealed in the heavens. In token of the power of miracle-working demons, the spirits of devils go forth to the kings of the earth and to the whole world. Where is she quoting from right there? She's actually quoting from Revelation 16 and verse 14. She says, these devils go out before the whole world to fasten them in deception and urge them to unite with Satan in his last struggle against the government of heaven. By these agencies, rulers and subjects will be alike deceived. Persons will arise pretending to be Christ himself and claiming the title and worship which belong to the world's Redeemer. They will perform wonderful miracles of healing and will profess to have revelations from heaven contradicting the testimony of the scriptures. And then the next paragraph says this, and I'll just read the first line here, or the first little bit. She says, as the crowning act in the drama, so this is the crowning act in the drama. We saw this drama sort of, of course but we see this drama sort of telling the last paragraph we talked about. But she says, as the crowning act in the drama of the great drama of deception, Satan himself will personate Christ. The church has long professed to look to the Savior's advent as the consummation of her hopes. Now the great deceiver will make it appear that Christ has come. In different parts of the earth, Satan will manifest himself among men as a majestic being of dazzling brightness, resembling the description of the Son of God given by John in the Revelation. And then, of course, she talks about how later this will be the almost overmastering delusion, as you see the last quote there, or part of the quote there at the bottom. Timing. I thought timing really made a difference. When you look at the two quotes that Ellen, or the one quote that we talked about, the threefold union, it almost appears that quote happens right before the close of probation. And Satan's making his way. He's almost on his way. And then we see after that, the chapter here we're reading, by the way, in Great Controversy, is the chapter of the time of trouble. It begins with the close of probation, and then it talks about Satan coming on the scene, gathering the world to fight against God's people. So that's Ellen White's quote. When you look at Revelation, what you find is Revelation 17 and 18, you see a threefold union, and we can see that probation is not quite closed because, as David brought out, there's a call to come out of her, my people. But then when you go to Revelation 16, which, again, this is not in order, any chronological order or scriptural order. But when you go to Revelation 16, what you do find is that you see that same threefold union, but this time you have the dragon, which the Bible tells us is Satan. And you see it happening during the 7 last plagues. That's what Revelation 16 is about, which we know that's the close of probation. So yeah, that's my conclusion. My conclusion is that I believe that Revelation 16 is a parallel to Great Controversy 6:24, and the quote that we read earlier is a parallel to Revelation 18. Any other questions, or stop it there for now?
Thank you, Anthony. Will you stop sharing your screen so that I can see everyone? Thank you.
Oh, it's Brother Eugene. So was there anything that, I know that it's like a short amount of time. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say too, I technically don't want to repeat myself, but what you shared today is exactly what I plan to share. In fact, I have my Great Controversy here. It's the same chapter that I was looking at, which is a time of trouble. So I don't want to repeat everything, but that was my concluding mark in regards to Revelation chapter 16. I do believe it's also spiritualism. I agree with that too as well. And I just want to say thank you for presenting additional points too. I also want to go maybe a step further. I'm not sure if you addressed it, but I believe that you also came to this conclusion. I believe that dragon that goes along with the false prophet as well as the beast to gather them for the great day of God Almighty. I believe that dragon is Satan when he personates Jesus Christ. That's what I came to my conclusion. And the reason why it also when he brings about the frogs, we know that it is also a counterfeit, the last counterfeit to be able to bring deception. That it also involves him counterfeiting the image of Christ. And in fact, I also too, I want to go to ending conflict. For some reason, you shared the statement when it came to the two great eras of immortality of the soul and Sunday sacredness, etc. The next paragraph also says this too, right after. It says, I'm not sure if you went through it, but it says, as spiritualism more closely imitates the nominal Christianity of the day, it has greater power to deceive and ensnare. Satan himself is converted after the modern order of things. And then it says, he will appear in the character of an angel of light through the agency of spiritualism. Miracles will be wrought, the sick will be healed, and many undeniable wonders will be performed. And as the spirits will profess faith in the Bible and manifest respect for the institutions of the church, their work will be accepted as the manifestation of divine power. And that is Great Controversy, page 588. And this is in the chapter, The Impending Conflict. But it's also interesting, as you shared in the chapter, page 623, 624, it also, she explains that same scenario of miracles being wrought, Satan revealing himself in the time of trouble. So it's like she's sharing it in that same context of a threefold union, but then she brings it out also in the time of trouble. So that was my concluding mark that I came. And I have some other Bible texts, but I think you did it wonderfully. So yeah, I agree.
I do agree with those statements. I actually was reading the Impending Conflict. There's so many more statements that I was looking at. And you brought out some chapters that I would just encourage people to go back and read that one, and along with the time of trouble. And I think everything you see in Revelation, she spells it out. But, you know, of course, we just don't have all the time to go over some of these things.
I do have a question. You know, I tried to study my Bible, but you know, when I went to Washington Hills, I was pretty much a Jehovah's Witness that believed in the Sabbath. So most of my time was spent in, you know, digging out our fundamental beliefs and comparing Jehovah's Witness beliefs with Adventist beliefs. And I've studied the book of Revelation, but I've always skipped over the middle part. Like study the front, study the back. But the middle part, I need to study it out more. But in my mind, like the question I had was, you know, in Revelation chapter 16, verse 13, the verse that we were studying, when you compare it with Revelation chapter 19, verse 20, and it talks about that false prophet, what it points out is that, you know, it's pointing us to that being, or whatever you want to call it, that brings miracles before them in order to deceive them. So here, you know, the characteristic that is bringing about to try to show us who that false prophet is, it just mentions that it's gonna be key in deceiving the people through the miracles. But I do know that the spirit of prophecy says that Satan is going to be the one that brings about miracles. And I do believe that you know, the US is going to be key in creating that image to the beast. But I just wonder, how do I reconcile that and also the idea that, you know, Protestantism, which is mainly going to be in the United States, you know, the Protestants and the United States are going to be the ones who are going to bring about that image to the beast. So I just wonder, how do we reconcile those ideas? Does that make sense?
You know, reconcile the idea of
Between Satan being the one bringing about miracles, and between the U.S. forming an image to the beast, and between the false prophet being the one that it's key in bringing about miracles and deceiving those that have received the mark of the beast and them that worship his image. Because it's true, I mean, we do have, you know how pagan Rome was what united with religious Rome was the one back then that really brought the persecution when those two united. But in the end time, we do know that it's going to be the U.S. But it's not just pagan U.S., you know, because what we do see in this battle at the end times is that we do see, you know, it's over the area of worship, it's over the area of spirituality. So I'm just trying to see it biblically, um, who this false prophet is. It's not coming in my mind still.
Mhm. Yeah, I was, and I don't know if someone else may have better answer to it or not. I think as far as like who does the miracles, um, Revelation 16 does mention how there are, you know, there's more than one. So the fact that the beast, the false, the frogs are coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, out of the mouth of the false prophet, um, that shows that it's not just one of them doing the miracles. So, in other words, the false prophet will be doing miracles, but Satan will too. And the Catholic Church, they've already talked about doing some of their miracles. One of the things I want to throw out, and I don't want to confuse it, but there will be also heathen deities doing miracles. We're told that last day events. So, yeah, it's all of them will be doing miracles as far as that question goes. How to identify the false prophet? I mentioned a little bit last week, but you know, I think it bears mentioning again that we have to identify it by characteristics. It's kind of like how we do with the papacy. The Bible doesn't necessarily come out and say the papacy. Yeah, that's the beast. So you have to go through characteristics. And how I would go about finding the characteristics, I would begin with Revelation 13. And, you know, just for example, when you look at Revelation 13, you see that this is there's just various characteristics that help to show us that this is America. For example, it gives power to the second. Well, it talks about the second beast, right? And the second beast gives power to the first beast. Well, why would the first beast need power? Well, the beginning of that chapter tells us that he had a deadly wound. Time-wise, if we had studied the first beast, we know that deadly wound happened in 1798. So we see, number one, that this power comes on the scene after 1798. Now, we're looking for a global power, by the way, because in verse 5 it says it caused the whole world to wonder after the beast when this deadly wound is healed. So this is some global power that comes up after 1798 that gives power to the beast. So when I look at that, right now, you only see 5 global powers. If you go to the UN has, you know, they always, the United Nations, they always change over certain powers, but there's 5 powers that always stay in the power. These are the global powers. That's China, Russia, I think it's France, Britain, and then the United States. So those are the 5 global world dominating powers that you would really notice. But when you really look at it, only one of them really came up after 1798, and that's the United States. You know, so prophetically, but that's not the only characteristic. You have the characteristic that he comes up in a more unpopulated area. He comes up out of the earth versus coming up out of the sea. If you understand the earth, the Bible says in Revelation 12 that the earth helps the woman. So persecution, people fled to America to help flee against their persecution. So my point is that I would start with Revelation 13. I say, oh, what are the characteristics? Oh, okay, this second beast is America. That would be the first way I would go about doing it. The second thing I would then see is that America is given specific characteristics in that it's told that it would do, verse 13, Revelation 13:13 says, and he doeth great wonders so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles he had power to do in the sight of the beast. So you see this characteristic, like, wait a minute, he actually deceives men, he does it in the sight of the beast, and he causes them by this deception to, later on you'll find, to receive the mark and to worship the image of the beast. So those are four characteristics. There's actually a fifth one. But those are four characteristics that says that this second beast, America, that's what he would do. So then, at least what I was led to look at was later on in Revelation 19, when you see the false prophet. In Revelation 19, what was interesting is I took those same characteristics and went over to Revelation 19, verse 20, and it says, and the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him. So wait a minute, this false prophet, just like the second beast, they bring about miracles before the first beast. And it says, and he too, the false prophet, deceives them that dwell on the earth, that they deceived them that had to receive the mark of the beast and worship the image of the beast. So again, the false prophet, he deceives the world. He deceives them so they can receive the mark of the beast, so they can actually worship the image of the beast. So that's my second point. Okay, wait a minute. The second beast, which I know is America, it has these characteristics, and then this false prophet in Revelation 19 has the same characteristics. And that's how I come to the idea that the false prophet and the second beast are the same. Does that make sense? I don't know if I answered all the questions, but that's how I would go about doing it.
Thank you. Thank you. It makes sense. Does anyone else have any other comments or questions?
I have something interesting. Not necessarily disagreeing with what anyone says. I think it's amazing. But I think, number one, the dragon is always the devil. And what I'm saying by that is the dragon, you see the serpent in Genesis 3. And if you look at the Hebrew of that, it could also be translated as dragon, sea monster. And when you look at the dragon throughout history, I mean, you see the serpent in Genesis 3, and then at the Revelation 20, I like how it says that dragon, that serpent of old. Again, you see the dragon from the beginning, Genesis, all the way to Revelation. From the beginning to end, it's always the devil working through something. Whether it's like Brother Eugene brought up last week, whether it's Babylon or Pharaoh of Egypt, he's always working through entities because physically, the devil can't kill us. The devil can't come over here and just kill me with a knife or shoot me in the head. The devil uses nations, kingdoms to do his bidding. So one thing that I found extremely interesting was whatever entity that is, whether it's Egypt or Pharaoh in Egypt or King Nebuchadnezzar through Babylon, or whether it's through the Pharisees, or whether it's through pagan Rome, it's always has to do, and this is what was really eye-opening to me, it always has to do with paganism. And what I mean by that, paganism could also be translated as spiritualism. It's just another form of idolatry. If I could take just a few minutes, I would like to show this to you. But let me just see if I could do this real quick. Let me share the screen here. Can you see that? Can you see what I have written here? Okay. Man, I gotta skip through a lot. Okay, so here, dragon, in my mind, equals paganism or spiritualism. I'm just going to skip through here. The name dragon, we see it, like Brother Eugene brought up, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, was described as a dragon. One interesting phenomenon is that King Nebuchadnezzar or Babylon was described as a dragon because they attributed their power to conquer nations, including Israel, to the power of their false gods. You'll see that in Habakkuk chapter 1. You'll see that with Egypt. Now, here's something that 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 just blew my mind away. You will not find the word paganism in the Bible. Like, you can't read the King James Version all of a sudden read pagan Rome or pagan Egypt or whatever. So where does that word come from? I found this to be extremely interesting. In 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 24. Now, this is just going to open up, I think, the key to understanding Revelation 16. In 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 24, it says, moreover, the workers with familiar spirits and the wizards and the images and the idols and all, notice how he summarizes it, and all the abominations that were spied in the land of Judah and in Jerusalem. Now, I'm just going to stop right there. That word abominations is incredible. If you were to look up just the Hebrew word of abominations, you'll find that it literally means a vile idol, an idol, and the pagan god which it represents. So literally, abomination is paganism. Abomination is basically the idolatry, the gods of this nation, the gods of this kingdom, etc. And so when you get to Revelation, you will find Babylon again mentioned in Revelation 17, and that to me was the key. In Revelation chapter 17, you'll find that whore, that harlot, that sits on a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns, etc. And so basically, when I was studying this out, it's describing, let me just skip here. When you get to the great whore and in Revelation 17, you'll find these interesting phenomenons about the great harlot. You'll find that the great harlot sits on many waters. Now notice, whom the kings of the earth committed fornication. Now, when you look at kings of the earth, this is political power. This is civil power. And throughout paganism, throughout Babylon or Nebuchadnezzar with Egypt, it was always about paganism and civil power. It was about having these ability to conquer nations. They were powerful, but what made them powerful wasn't just their chariots and their ability to war, but it was the idols and the gods that they associated where they got this power from. And so finally in Revelation 17, you have this great harlot who commits with the kings, adultery with the kings of the earth and everything. Now, here's what's interesting. I saw the woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Again, where have we seen the 7 heads and 10 horns? Where's the beast where we saw with 7 heads and 10 horns? Well, don't have to go too far. Revelation chapter 12, which also is described in Revelation 13, which is talking about paganism, spiritualism. And so what I would like to submit, and I'm not going to take any more time. I mean, it just eye-opening. Again, you find that this woman has a cup, and what is the cup full of? Abominations. What is that talking about? That again is talking about paganism, spiritualism. And so this lady, this whore, is using spiritualism to basically fornicate with all the leaders, with all the churches, and create this great apostasy within the Christendom and the world. And so, I mean, I could keep going down and down talking about the 7 kings, etc. Anthony brought up the 10 horns, the golden cup. The basic thought, and I'm just going to end right here, is this. Abominations to me is a secret key in understanding paganism, in understanding how paganism fits in with the dragon. First of all, and I'll summarize this in 1 minute, the dragon always represents the devil, period. The devil, though, works through different entities. Number one entity I've seen throughout scripture is paganism. How do I know that? Well, if you look at Egypt, if you look at King Nebuchadnezzar, you'll notice that they attributed their power with their false gods or / paganism, which is spiritualism. And so when you get to Revelation 16:13, it says, I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. The dragon there, I believe, like the pioneers, still represents paganism. It still represents this union that the devil is using to fit spiritualism, which is spiritualism. Because remember, if you look at that quote, Ellen White says 3 things. She says what? Spiritualism, the United States, and the Roman Catholic Church. which is all what we see there. Paganism is just another word to say spiritualism. And so that's the connection that I saw. Revelation 17, I believe, is the key to understanding the, basically with the abomination.
You still there?